Today I bring to you the sad, sadistic story of Derek Ernest Percy, who is the worst man to ever come out of Australia. He was imprisoned for taking the life of Yvonne Elizabeth Toohey on a Victorian beach in July 1969. I'll go over the case, give you all the details. If you do end up liking this video, please subscribe. I also have a trials and interrogations channel, link is in the description. Derek was declared not guilty by reason of insanity. He remained imprisoned because he was considered too dangerous to be released. In December 2005, it was claimed he took the lives of many others, but he didn't admit to any of these in fear of never being released from prison. So we start with Yvonne Toohey. 12-year-old Yvonne was at a beach in the small town of Beaumont in Western Port Bay, Victoria, one day in July 1969. She was talking with her friend Shane Spiller, then aged 11. Percy, a 21-year-old naval rating at the time, snatched Toohey and then he slit her throat. He probably would have abducted Spiller as well, but Spiller was carrying a tomahawk, which he waved to stop Percy approaching him. Percy abducted Toohey and drove off with her. Spiller was able to describe Percy, the car, and a naval badge to the police. The naval badge here is the key piece of information. Once the police knew this could have been a member of the Navy, all they had to do was go to the local or the nearest Navy office, have a look around. That would give them further leads. So this description led police to HMAS Cerberus, which was the nearby Navy installation from where Percy was on weekend leave. They found him within 3 hours of the murder and caught him red-handed. He was washing the blood from his clothes. There was speculation that Percy had committed the crime in a frenzy, and that later realization and horror about what he had done led him to shut it out of his memory. Percy's memory was apparently already receding, but Detective Sergeant Richard Knight took Percy through the process in reverse so that he could reveal where he had put Toohey's body. It was found 10 kilometers from the beach. Percy was found to be criminally insane. Picked earlier as being naval officer material, he hadn't been found suitable and had succumbed to a fantasy world. Charged with murder, he pled insanity, and he was sentenced to be detained at the governor's pleasure. He was committed to Ararat Hospital in April 1970. Percy appeared settled in prison. According to a prison officer who knew him, the prison officer said he was the chess champion, a stamp collector, and one of the best tennis players in the division. He smoked, but despite being in prison for so long, he kept himself fit. Having worked in the printing industry in Ararat prison for 11 years, he had set up databases and allocated jobs to prisoners. He was said to be a model prisoner. However, he kept himself to himself. He received no visitors, and the same prison officers who described him as the model prisoner, they also said he's highly intelligent, but you could never get a handle on his real feelings. More significantly, he's our Hannibal Lecter. Now, in 1998, it was revealed that Percy's case was going to be reviewed by the Victorian Supreme Court. New rules had been introduced for prisoners serving indefinite jail terms under the category at the governor's pleasure, and it was speculated that he could be freed. In response to this speculation, it was said that the Victorian government was considering instructing lawyers to appear at any hearing. The idea here was to oppose anything Percy had to say and to ensure he doesn't get released under the guise of public safety. Percy's case was heard by a Supreme Court Judge Geoffrey Eames. On the 30th of September 1998, Eames refused to set a minimum sentence for Percy or a release date, despite Percy having served the 25-year term that was the state norm for insane criminals. Eames said that Percy has never been treated for his paedophilia, nor had he ever sought treatment. Eames went on to say he has demonstrated no significant remorse or anxiety, at least none which I find credible. In March 2004, Percy applied to be transferred from Ararat Jail to Thomas Embling Psychiatric Hospital. This application was turned down by Justice Murray Kellam, who, like others to have studied Percy's case, said he was not convinced that Percy didn't still have dangerous sexual fantasies about taking the lives of children. Now, in February 2005, the leader of the opposition party in the Victorian Parliament, Robert Doyle, he decided, I'm going to make some political capital. He said that if his party came back into power, he would introduce Hannibal Lecter laws to ensure that Percy and people like him would never be released. Robert Doyle went on to say, there should not be any chance at all that Percy can get out, and we will introduce laws which provide for life lockup or special case prisoners who are beyond help or redemption. He also went on to say that Percy was a danger to the community and that this state has laws to imprison people for serious violent, sexual and drug crimes for an indefinite period of time. Going back to 2004, Percy began a one-on-one sex offenders program, which he said at the time that he was doing well in. However, according to a report that was leaked at the time, it said Derek hopes that participation in the program might give him a chance of possible parole. In more detail, the report also said Mr. Percy does not suffer from a mental illness and is not detainable under the Mental Health Act. He does have a personality disorder, and his ability to experience human emotions is severely restricted. The most serious aspect of his personality is his sadistic fantasy life, which revolves around children, their torture, and mutilation. He has no motivation to curb or control the deviant sexual fantasies. I would be pessimistic about his ability to respond to any form of treatment. Mr. Percy is not suitable for transfer to hospital, even though he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The Adult Parole Board refused to recommend Percy's release. And judging by this, having spoken to psychiatrists, we can conclude, yes, he had his issues, and yes, he had personality flaws, but he knew what he was doing. Psychiatrists went on to say that he should not be removed from a prison to a less secure hospital. Dr. Stevens, the Penridge Prison's coordinator of forensic psychiatric services, had written in 1984 that Percy was a highly dangerous sadistic pedophile who should never be released from safe custody. Dr. Stevens wrote one time that Percy is not certifiable, neither is he psychiatrically treatable, and he is totally unsuited to a mental institution. An unnamed policeman at the time went on to say similar things. The policeman said, regarding Percy, he is intelligent, cunning, and pure evil. There is no way he is insane. There were also others who had examined Percy and came to the same conclusion. One report said, if Percy is ever so transferred, he will, in all probability, earn some degree of freedom as the result of reasonable and conforming behavior. The consequences of such freedom could well prove tragic. Going back to the incident in 1969, Yvonne's friend Shane Spiller never really got over the tragedy. Speaking many years later, he said, I was promised back then that he would never get out. I hope people don't forget what he was like and what he did. They always thought he killed others, but they weren't able to prove it. Percy had been every child's worst nightmare, and for Spiller, he had hoped that that encounter in 1969 was the last time he'd ever see him. Unfortunately for Spiller, he had to be used as a witness in the case. As Spiller described it, what happened stuffed me. In the lineup at Russell Street Police Station, I had to pick him. I had to walk up and point right at his nose. The look he gave me, I can still remember it. The trauma of having to walk up in a line of people and pick out the man that took the life of your friend, ruined your childhood, to look him in the eye, to remain composed, the trauma must have been immense. But to the adult detectives who supervised the scene, it was both logical and necessary. Percy was surrounded by policemen and obviously couldn't do any more harm. Whether this was obvious to an 11-year-old Spiller is difficult to say. He appeared to have still been terrified by Percy, and in the year 2000, he applied for compensation. 31 years after Yvonne was murdered. He was awarded $5,000, and after appeal, he was given $50,000, which was the maximum that could be awarded under the compensation system. By this time, he was living in Widham, a town in southeast New South Wales. Locals who knew him said that he remained scared. Spiller himself, though, he disappeared in August 2002. When police investigated, they realized that his car was still parked in front of his house. It is possible that he may have fled in being scared of Percy, or that he took his own life. Police sources are believed to have a different explanation for his disappearance. However, they believe he was murdered for his compensation payout. Now, regarding Derek Percy, The circumstances under Yvonne's murder, the police thought, well, maybe he committed other crimes. Dick Knight, who later became an assistant police commissioner in Victoria, was involved in the original case and thought that Percy had been involved in other murders. The police opinion was reinforced by the contents of notebooks found in Percy's locker at HMAS Cerberus. This notebook detailed ways of abducting and mistreating children. The defense psychiatrist, Dr. Whitaker, was of the opinion that a man who had expressed himself in the way Perry had done would probably have done more than just write about it. He believed that Percy had taken the lives of other children. He feared, however, that Percy would have wiped knowledge of these murders from his memory. So the cases to which the police suspect Percy was involved, we start with the abduction and disappearance of the Beaumont children. Police at the time established that Percy was near the scene of the crime when the children went missing, and to this day, that crime still hasn't been resolved some 50 years or so after. It's still a cold case. We also go on to the Wanda Beach murders of Christine Sharrock and Marion Schmidt, both aged 16 at Wanda Beach, Sydney on the 13th of January 1965. There's also the murder of Simon Brooke, aged 3 in Glebe, Inner Sydney on the 19th of May 1968. His body was found in a cubbyhole near his home. Commenting on this and the Wanda Beach murders, when Percy was arrested, he said, "I could have run it, but I don't really remember." Percy has admitted to driving past the location where the body was found one day of the murder. We now move on to the disappearance of Linda Stillwell, aged 8, from St Kilda, Melbourne, on Saturday, August the 10th, 1968. She was last seen at around 5 p.m, having been playing with her elder brother and sister and some other children near St Kilda Pier and Luna Park on the St Kilda foreshore. She had never been found, and Percy did admit to the police that he was in that area on that day. There's also the murder of Alan Redston, aged 6, in Canberra in September 1968. His body was found in a muddy creek near his home. Now, commenting in 1998 on the cases for which Percy remained a suspect, the acting head of Victorian Homicide, Detective Inspector Paul Sheridan, said that the police were checking the evidence linking Percy to the murders. He was believed to have had some alibis to these cases, but not all. One of the problems the police had while investigating was that they didn't have a sample of his DNA. Police in Victoria can by law take DNA samples from anybody convicted of a crime, but Percy was never convicted, having been found not guilty by reason of insanity. This legal loophole meant that police could not take his DNA. In 2002, a parliamentary law reform committee in the Victorian Parliament began public hearings. One of the suggestions tabled in the Victorian Parliament in March 2004 was that the legal loophole to be eliminated so that DNA samples could be taken from people like Percy. So at this stage, it seems like Percy was waiting to be released because they couldn't tie him to these other murders. The police thought, well, we can do it if we get this DNA approval, if you like. And the Attorney General Rob Hulls in 2004 said, "I'll consider making this change." But a year later, in February 2005, the bill still hadn't been passed. Going back to 2004, Percy was again investigated over the disappearance of Linda Stillwell. On the 2nd of February 2005, detectives from Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales and the Australian Federal Police applied for permission to interview Percy based on new information. In a secret hearing at the Melbourne Magistrates Court, this permission was granted. Commenting publicly on the investigation, the Victorian Police Commissioner Christine Nixon said, "I think that what we are doing is simply at the very preliminary stages. When we've got some more information, when in fact the investigators have had a chance to talk with this individual, then we'll certainly make some information available as we can." She went on to say, "These are very difficult issues and areas. They are old cases, the families involved. You don't really want to raise their expectations until we're a lot clearer. We clearly have information, and that information will be put out when we've got further to say about the matter." This new information possessed by police at the time, they revealed it was when Percy told them he was in St Kilda on the day of the murder. Percy was then removed from Ararat prison to the Victorian Police Homicide Offices in St Kilda Road. They put him there so then they can ask him about Linda Stillwell and other cases they suspected of him being the criminal. He was questioned for 9 hours but said, "I can't remember anything." He made no admissions and then he was taken back to Ararat prison. Police investigations continued, and on the 20th of November 2005, it was announced that Percy would be subpoenaed to give evidence at a new inquest into the unsolved 1968 murder of Simon Brooke. Simon Brooke was 3 years old when his life was taken on the 19th of May 1968. It was also hoped that the inquest, to begin on the 12th of December 2005, would bring to light details that could help solve other crimes. Simon Brooke's father, Professor David Brooke, confirmed that he would testify at the inquest. Speaking publicly at the time, Donald Brooke said, "It is in the public interest that the facts should be established, even after such a long time. This is partly because it encourages trust in the police and in the judicial process. It is also partly because, assuming that the facts can be reliably established, it may become possible to make sure that no other child would ever suffer the same fate at the same hands." Percy was flown to Sydney under tight security on the 9th of December. The inquest, conducted by the New South Wales coroner, Mr. John Albanethy, was scheduled to begin at the Glebe Coroner's Court on 12th of December. It was expected to run for around 2 days. The inquest opened and was adjourned until the next day to give Percy's legal team the time to talk to their client. When the inquest opened again on the 13th of December, detailed accounts of the murders of both Yvonne and Simon Brooke were given to the coroner. Peter Zara, the counsel assisting the coroner, said that both cases had striking similarities. Mr. Abernethy agreed. He said that the murders were substantially and relevantly similar, and that the circumstances in which they occurred were again remarkably similar. Detective Sergeant Adam Barwick, in charge of the new investigation into Simon Brooke's murder, said that 300 suspects had been eliminated from the original inquiry. Barwick also said that he could not find anything in the case file that said that Percy had been ruled out as a suspect. Percy had been serving in the Navy in Sydney at the time of the murder. Barwick informed the coroner that, in my personal opinion, Derek Ernest Percy is responsible in taking the life of Simon Brooke. A statement from a Victorian policeman was also heard by the coroner. The policeman had known Percy since they had been at school together. The policeman said that in 2004 he had spoken to Percy about the murder. In his statement, Percy admitted to the police officer that he had driven past the location where Simon Brooke's body had been found on the day that Simon was murdered, but the body had not been discovered till the next day. Detective Sergeant Adrian Patterson, a police identification expert, pointed out similarities between photographs taken of Percy in the 1990s and an identikit picture of a man seen walking with Simon Brooke shortly before the murder. Other links could not be made, however. There had been speculation before the inquest that forensic evidence might give another lead. In particular, there were rumors that DNA tests might have been applied to objects found with the body. However, police refused to confirm or deny that they had DNA evidence, and Sergeant Barwick told the coroner's court that all of the clothing had been incinerated in 1988. Percy's barrister, Nathan Steele, said that there's no more evidence provided than that which was provided in 1969. He said that the evidence was all circumstantial and nothing physical linking Percy to the crime. Having taken all the arguments into consideration, the coroner said there was a reasonable prospect that a jury would convict a known person in relation to the events. The inquest was terminated after 1 day and it was referred to the Department for Public Prosecutions. Speaking outside the inquest, Professor Brooks said, "If it is possible to find out who did this and make quite sure it's not possible for this person to do the same thing again, then that will be very much in the public interest. Grief is something everybody has, and I don't think ours is a matter of concern to anybody, so much as the knowledge that the police do their work and the judicial process grinds on. irrespective of time. Now, some of the evidence given at this inquest was not reported till a few days after. It was revealed publicly for the first time that it was Percy himself who had told police that he had been in St. Kilda on the day in 1968 that Linda Stillwell vanished. Another document tendered in evidence contained a statement by a New South Wales police officer. The officer, a detective in the homicide squad, expressed his doubts about Percy's willingness to cooperate with inquiries. Percy stated that he hoped one day he would be released from jail. This detective in the homicide squad said that he believes Percy will not admit to anything whilst he still holds out in the hope that he'll be released. So, how likely is it that Percy was responsible for these other crimes? Well, let's take a look at them. Now, Percy is a good suspect for the abduction of the Beaumont children, and it is believed that he was in the area at the time they disappeared. He is quite clearly capable of having murdered them and the other cases for which he remains a prime suspect, considering most of these cases are all very similar. He also matches the description of the suspect. Whilst he had been linked to a number of similar cases, the only one for which he has been caught was the one at which he was caught red-handed. He would have been only 18 when the Beaumonts disappeared, which is younger than the suspected age given in the description for the suspect. Logic suggests that the Beaumont abductor must have had a car nearby, but how Percy could have had easy access to a car in Adelaide has not been explained. More critically, Percy may have been too young to drive. Finally, there isn't enough evidence to definitively link him to the case, and police had 3 other suspects that they could have thought of. Eventually, Percy died from lung cancer in St. Vincent Hospital in Melbourne on the 23rd of July 2013. He was 64 years old, without admitting to any further crimes. At the time, he was the longest serving prison inmate in Australia, some 44 years. A tragic, sad story of a man who committed crimes, who knows? All we can do is keep the tragedy of the loved ones in our minds. Thank you for watching.